Hola clase, this is podcast 114. That's level 1, unit 1, video 4. The topic for this video is los pronombres de sujeto, which in English is subject pronouns. You are expected to be taking notes in your notebook. I'm going to cut out for a second and show you what those notes are going to end up looking like. Okay, so after you grabbed all of your materials from the classroom, here's what my notebook looks like. Here's what your notes are going to look like when you're done. You should be somewhere around pages 5 and 6. If that's off a little bit, that's fine. Just make sure you go back into your table of contents and label what page you're on with these notes. I do want subject pronouns and the verb ser to be next to each other. So whatever page you're working on, make sure you have two open pages so they can be together. Over here, we're going to take some notes on the definition of subject pronouns. This is the foldable you get from class. You're going to glue it down the middle and then fold and separate each tab so that you can lift them up. So you have 6 tabs you can lift up. And then you also have these pocket-shaped foldables that you're going to get from class. Those you will glue just on the top here so that you can lift them up and look at the answer to the question. So now that you see what your notes are going to look like for today, let's go ahead and go back to the board and figure all these subject pronouns out. Okay, so now that you know how to set your notebook up, let's go ahead and start writing those notes. So first we need the definition. What is a subject pronoun? So first, the subject of a sentence is the person who is doing the action. Okay? An example in English would be Mrs. Brees teaches Spanish. Mrs. Brees teaches Spanish. Okay? In this sentence, teaches is our verb. That's the thing being done, the action. Who is doing the action is Mrs. Brees. That makes my name the subject of our sentence. So one more time, the subject is the person who is doing the action. But now the title of our podcast is subject pronouns. So a pronoun is a word that can replace a noun. In this sentence, Mrs. Brees is the noun that is the subject of the sentence. So the pronoun would replace that name, Mrs. Brees. So a pronoun, by definition, in Spanish, is a word that will replace the name of who is doing the action. Okay, so let's take that example again. Mrs. Brees teaches Spanish. I'm going to write Mrs. Brees teaches. Okay, again, we still have the verb teaches. Okay, but now if I want to use a pronoun to replace Mrs. Brees, I would use the word she. She teaches. If I didn't want to say Mrs. Brees again, I could replace it with she. So she is my pronoun, or more specifically, my subject pronoun. If you need to finish writing the definitions and examples, pause it now. I'm going to erase everything so that we can move on. Okay, so in your notebook, you have the foldable that looks like this, with all of the little tabs that you can fold up. You glued it down the middle. I'm going to draw a chart that looks like that on the board here. Okay, get very familiar with this chart because we will use it all through your time here in Spanish. This is called a verb chart. Right now we're using it with subject pronouns so that you know in the future how they will match each verb. So, if you're comparing to what is in your notebook, your glue is right here. And then the outside tabs represent the part of the box. So, we have the first one in Spanish is yo. Yo in English is I. The second box here is tú, which means you. I'm going to make this box a little bit longer so I can write more. This third box in your chart will have 3 subject pronouns in it. We will have él, ella, and usted. Usted will be abbreviated UD. So if you see UD, it's usted. Él in English is he. Ella is she. And usted is a formal form of you. We will talk about that more in just a second. Let's finish this chart. On the other side of your chart, you have nosotros and nosotras. Those both in English mean we. Next, we have vosotros or vosotras. In English, those mean like you all. And then that last box, we have ellos, ellas, or ustedes. Again, this might be abbreviated UDS. So if you see UDS in Spanish, that's ustedes. These stand for they, but all masculine, all boys. This is all boys or mixed boys and girls. Ellas is they, but all girls. It's feminine. Ustedes is another form of you all. Okay, so now that you see the English and the Spanish, I'm hoping that in your notebook, what you did was lift up the tab that says yo and write I underneath. And then lift up the tab that says tú and write you underneath. So the English meaning will go underneath each of these. Okay, so on the bottom of your notes, what you're cutting out, we have these little tabs and they each have a question on them. So we're going to work on the answer right now. Okay, so the first question you have is, when do you use the tú pronoun? The other question is, when do you use usted? And then lastly, when do you use ustedes? Okay, so the answers to these you're going to write under the flap in your notes. So, when do you use tú? Tú can be used with family, when you're speaking to someone who's in your family, or friends. You can use it when you're speaking to people your age or younger. And lastly, anyone you call by their first name. So if you're speaking to someone that you use their first name with, you will use to. Anyone you're on a first name basis with. So we kind of generalize to as being the informal you. All right, when do you use usted? You will use usted for adults you address with a title. Adults you address with a title. For example, Mrs. Brees, Mr. Campbell. Anyone you use a title like Mr. or Mrs. with is usted. This is basically adults older than you. We kind of generalize usted as then being the formal you. So tu is the informal way to say you. Usted is the formal way to say you. And then lastly, ustedes. Ustedes is going to be used when you're speaking to two or more people. Anytime you're speaking to a group that has more than two people, more than one person, two or more, you're going to say you all, and that would be the ustedes form. All right, we have nosotros and vosotros that each have a different way of being written. So nosotros, if there is a group of all guys or mixed gender of guys and girls, you will use the nosotros form. Always defaults to masculine form. But if you have a group of all women, if I'm saying my friends and we're all girls, I'm going to have to use the nosotras form, the feminine form. Vosotros, when you use it, will do the same thing. If I'm saying you all to a group of all girls, I will use vosotras. Ellos and ellas will work the same way. If you have a group of all guys or guys and girls, it'll be the masculine form. But if you are saying they and speaking about a group of all girls, it's going to change to ellas. Okay, so that is it for the notes on subject pronouns. Let me know in class if you have any questions.